Things Podcast. Hey, Phantomaniacs, welcome to the newest episode of the Needless Things Podcast, where we talk about toys, movies, music, and all manner of pop culture dorkery. I am your host, Dave, and this week's episode is focused on the first part of that introduction, toys. There is Star Wars talk of a more general nature, but mainly we're sitting down with Victoria from Victoria's Cantina podcast and YouTube channel to talk about the HasLab's release of the Khetanna, which is Jabba's sail barge to most of us. Unless you're a big expanded universe nerd like myself and like our guest Victoria, you probably didn't even know that Jabba's sail barge had a name. Heck, I didn't remember it until HasLab announced this thing last year. So today's episode, we're going to talk a lot about the sail barge. We're going to talk a lot about just Star Wars in general, and it's a really cool conversation with a new friend of the show. Before we get to that, I'm going to talk a little bit about what's been going on. Tonight, I had a very exciting creative meeting with a couple of, one friend who I've worked with a whole lot and one new friend. And we've got a special project that, honestly, I'm not sure how much I can say about it. I can tell you that it's going to come to fruition. I believe it's the first Monday in June. And I think I can also say it's part of the Atlanta Film Festival. It's something very exciting, not only the fact that I'm working with these two guys, but what we're working on is something that's near and dear to my heart. And it's unlike anything I've ever really done before. As you know, I love to perform. I love to be in front of audiences. I love to grab a microphone when I can. But this is going to be a different experience for me, and just in sitting with these guys for a few hours tonight and going back and forth about what we were going to do and figuring out our plan for what this thing is going to be, it was a different process, but one that I thoroughly enjoyed because it's been a while since I've really engaged in that way. I had a great time on the set of Joe Striker, filming my role for that movie, which I'm sure we'll have more about sooner than later. But that was mainly, hey, do this. Okay, now I'm going to do this. This was a whole different thing. It was an exchange of ideas. It was very much a sharing of the creative process, and I just had it was reinvigorating because I've missed that in my life. So that was cool. Another cool thing is me and Phantom Jr. have continued to make our way through the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies. Excuse me, had to have a little sip of beverage there. I'm a little dry after talking creative ideas all night long. So me and Phantom Jr., obviously Avengers Endgame comes out, Thursday. So yesterday to you guys, to me, it's in a couple of days, and unfortunately I'm working Thursday night, so we don't get to go see it until Friday night after Phantom Jr. gets out of school. And I just bought tickets for us to go see it again Sunday morning because Sunday afternoon I will be getting on the old Skypotron with a few of the Needless Things irregulars, and we're going to be doing a review of Avengers Endgame. I'm very excited. I'm also very nervous about the possibility of spoilers, because the big premiere was tonight. If you go on Instagram, if you follow Marvel or Disney at all, they put up a lot of really cool little messages from the various actors who are part of the Avengers franchise. So that's like getting me really, really hyped up. But I'm also nervous because I have to work Thursday night, which means basically I'm not getting on social media all Thursday night, all Friday during the day. So I'm going to have to find something to write about. And it worked out pretty well for me this past Sunday when I was working overnight and I couldn't watch the second episode of the new season of Game of Thrones, and I had to stay off the social media. Although one of the dum-dums I work with got on Twitter and then felt the need to share the spoiler, minor spoiler, that she saw. And honestly, when she said it, I was in kind of a an interesting brain space where I wasn't really paying too much attention. I didn't totally catch what she said. So nothing, and really there wasn't too much to be spoiled anyway, but it's a very delicate time now for nerds as far as the potentiality of spoilers goes. And look, I get it. I get the idea of, well, what does spoilers mean anyway? Just go in and enjoy the thing, and if you're going to go watch it again, then the spoilers don't matter like the second time through, right? But here's my thing. Watching Iron Man 3, every single time I watch Iron Man 3, and I'm one of the ones who likes that movie, every single time I watch it, I'm mad that Marvel Studios spoiled all of the Iron Man suits from the end of the movie. Because that should have been a big, exciting, awesome reveal, and instead it's something that they just threw in the trailer. And it was very clearly set up through the course of the movie to be a big reveal. Very much like, and I don't feel like this is a spoiler because, one, the movie's been out for a few weeks now, and two, they did it in the trailer. Very much like the new Pet Sematary, where the movie was very clearly building towards the different death being a surprise and being a well-crafted, shocking moment. That the movie doesn't hinge on that surprise, but it is clearly, they wanted it to be like a big twist, like, oh, wow, I didn't know that was going to happen. And instead, the movie studio decided to spoil it in the trailers. Same kind of thing. As a matter of fact, is it the same studio? Because I believe Iron Man 3 was still Paramount, and I believe Pet Sematary is Paramount, but I could be wrong about both of those things. But anyway, and you can find my review of the new Pet Sematary on needlessthingspodcast.com. Overall, I really, really dug the heck out of it. Another big announcement I've got. If you've been following Needless Things for any amount of time, you know that the Needless Things podcast is hosted on Podbean. That's one website. And that's pretty much just where the podcast is. I don't necessarily encourage traffic there. It's just where it's hosted. NeedlessThingsPodcast.com is the main podcast, or is the main website for Needless Things, where you can find the podcast every Friday. And then myself and our head writer, Beth, will be providing articles every week. Usually 5 days a week, which I did not expect to be the case now, but that's just sort of what's ended up happening a lot of weeks lately. But then needlessthingssite.com, which I never particularly cared for that name, but sometimes you're kind of limited by what's available. Needlessthingssite.com was the old site, which was a blogger site, which had a lot of limitations. I was never totally happy with it, or at least once I sort of figured out a little bit more about running a website, I found that Blogger was not the best place for it. NeedlessThingsPodcast.com is WordPress, which I switched the name, switched the site. It's very nice. It's very clean. It's easy to navigate. It's easy for us to post to. It's just a better site. And I was in the process of importing everything from the Blogger site, which is 8 years of content, to the WordPress site, and it just doesn't seem like it's going to happen. So I finally broke down and went ahead and purchased a new domain, which is oldneedlessthings.com. And that will direct you to the Blogger site. Now, the Blogger site is not going to be updated. It's basically just an archive. But I am going through and doing my best to clean up some formatting issues, some broken links. And it'll take me years. But if you're like, hey, didn't he review some Star Wars Vintage Collection figures at one point? Or maybe I'd like to read that recap of the first season of Game of Thrones. Or isn't there a movie review for, whatever in there somewhere? Well, it's all back up now. Some of the pictures may be missing. There may be some holes here and there. But all of mine and Beth's content from the old Needless Things website is now available once again at oldneedlessthings.com. So you can go check it out. We'll be able to link back to the older stuff and our new articles now on needlessthingspodcast.com, which is still the main site and still going forward where everything will be updated. Excuse me, needed another little sip of beverage there. So that's cool. That's exciting. I'm glad, even though I hate to be spread across so many different domains, that's just how it is. That's how I've always done things, is just to the best of my ability, the best that I can do them. And so there you go. NeedlessThingsPodcast.com, oldneedlessthings.com. And then beyond that, I don't know that I've got that much to talk about. I'm getting caught up on Into the Badlands, which I think is a tremendously under-discussed show. It's excellent. It's perfect. It's wonderful. I love it. I think everybody should be watching it. Game of Thrones is happening and is going away soon, and I'm very sad about that. I'm very nervous about the nights that I have to work nights getting spoiled. The final episode of Game of Thrones, I'm scheduled to work that night. I'm not super stoked about it, but it's the nature of my job. What are you going to do? Let's see. I think that's about everything we've got. Avengers Endgame, like that this week, that's what everything is about. And if you want to, and you should, needlessthingspodcast.com this past Wednesday, I posted an interesting piece that I had a lot of fun writing about the independence of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, of the movies within the MCU. So how well do I think each of the movies stand on their own? How much support do they require from the other movies? How many references are there that are necessary to the plot within each movie? I sat down and just kind of had a fun time thinking about the MCU and about how everything interconnects. So if you go to needlessthingspodcast.com and check this past Wednesday's post, which is April the 25th, then you'll see an MCU post, and I believe our pal Beth is ranking the MCU, doing fresh Marvel Cinematic Universe rankings as far as the quality of the movies that will be going up on Thursday the 26th. So I'm sorry, I got those dates wrong because it's 3 o'clock in the morning right now, and it actually is Wednesday. So Wednesday, April 24th is my independence within the MCU, and then Thursday, the 25th, will be Beth's ranking of the MCU, fresh new rankings on the MCU movies. So go check those things out. And now it is time to sit down with Victoria from Victoria's Cantina, and you should check out the podcast and the YouTube channel for all kinds of awesome Star Wars stuff. And we're going to talk about Star Wars, and we're going to talk about a big-ass toy. All right, we've got a special treat today on the Needless Things podcast. As you all know, the immense Khetanna, and we'll discuss that pronunciation in just a minute here, Jabba's sail barge was offered by Hasbro in a very unorthodox way last year. And I want to talk to somebody about this thing, and the somebody that seemed best was Victoria from Victoria's Cantina. Welcome to the show.
Dave, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
I know there are tons and tons and tons of places to hear about Star Wars online, but what's interesting to me is finding out sort of people's different perspectives, their different views, and how they got into the hobby of collecting and talking about Star Wars toys. So tell us a little bit about your background with Star Wars and how these toys have become such a big part of your life.
Absolutely. So we got to go back quite a ways. So we're going to go back to the late 80s. Growing up back then, obviously, we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have tablets. We didn't have computers to do all these fun games on. So we played with toys. And I think that was the case for a really long time up until those technologies really existed and were mainstream. So my parents, they would buy us toys. And our family would buy us toys. And the first lines that I remember, I was the oldest of 3 siblings that we really had, were Ghostbusters by Kenner. We had the Playmates Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and then we had a few of the Batman figures by Toy Biz and then Kenner. and a few Barbie dolls here and there, but I was really gravitating towards the figures that were from the films that I liked. I mean, there were no like Barbie movies at the time. You had things like Disney movies, but they didn't really do a whole lot with the merchandise. You might have had a few Happy Meal toys type things.
Not back then, anyway. Now it's a different story.
Absolutely. You might have had like Happy Meal toys through McDonald's, things like that, but not really a proper toy line. But movies like Batman or TV shows like Ninja Turtles or Ghostbusters, all of those had very developed toy lines. And I was really into those as a kid. They just captured my attention. They captured my imagination. And from then, it kind of just grew. Like, we amassed quite a few toys. And like I said, our family would buy us toys for birthdays and Christmas. And it just kind of went on from there. It's something that I've never outgrown. And I think it was 1996 where I started actually getting into Star Wars when they were in the midst of the Power of the Force 2 line. And the way that I caught sight of that was my uncle had been collecting a few pieces here and there. And I know I had seen Star Wars and I had seen Empire and Jedi. And I thought, well, that's cool. Let me look a little bit more into this. And next time we went to the toy store, I paid attention to the Star Wars toys. And I thought, I enjoy these movies. I don't know them as well as some of these other movies that I like, but I think I could get into that. So the very first Power of the Force 2 figure I got was C-3PO. And that was actually purchased for me by my grandmother. And basically that one gift that I got turned into a lifelong passion for Star Wars and for collecting Star Wars toys, and just a lifelong passion and adoration for toys, period, because I've always been into all those other franchises that I noted, as well as Jurassic Park. That's been a huge one for me, especially lately with the...
So this has been a good year for you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The Jurassic World toys by far have been outperforming anything I showcase on my YouTube channel by a long shot. And I just adore everything Mattel's been doing. As somebody that did have those Kenner Jurassic Park toys and did wake up on Christmas morning to the classic red T-Rex, I absolutely am all 100% in what they've been doing there. But to mention how I got into actually showcasing toys and reviewing them. It was 2013. I had recently been laid off of a job that I had had for almost 4 years. And it was a pretty big change. I relocated. I was living in Orange County, California. I moved down to San Diego, California, where I'm still at. And my boyfriend at the time, who's my husband now, was living here already. And I had a little bit of free time as I was, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I ended up actually going back to school, and then I graduated last year. I finally finished. But in my free time, I thought, okay, I have all these toys. Actually, when you move, you realize how many toys you have because it's like, where am I going to put all these toys? What do I do with them? So I thought, you know what? I'm going to showcase this. I'm going to share my passion for Star Wars and Jurassic Park and, DC and all these other toys that I have with other people. Around that time, I had noticed that on YouTube, people were starting to do toy reviews, and they were starting to show their collections. And I thought, you know what, I could do that. I could show what I have, and hopefully somebody out there is going to see it, and they are going to maybe have some appreciation for these lines. Maybe we can have a conversation about how they collected. And what started with a couple of, just a few video reviews, I really didn't think anything was going to come from, over the last 6 years has turned into a pretty decent-sized YouTube channel. We're over 20,000 at this point. I think we have somewhere near 12 million combined views. We have Cantina Chatter podcast, which is an extension of the channel. We talk about toys and films, and we talk to people that might have had small roles in the Star Wars films, things like that. But then I also have the Discoveryland podcast, which is it's a Disneyland history-focused podcast. I'm a huge Disneyland fan, and we talk about the history of extinct attractions and rides and things that are no longer there. And then I also cover events like Toy Fair, San Diego Comic-Con, where I've been able to have great conversations with the people that are bringing us these awesome toys. Sometimes I get them on the podcast. And I've written a few articles for websites. We've done some for Jedi Temple Archives, for Jedi Insider, for Toy News Insider, for Jurassic Park Podcast. So I have a lot of fun. It really is kind of like a part-time job, all the time that I do put into this. And of course, on Instagram, we're huge on the toy photography with the Jurassic Park toys and the Star Wars toys and all that. But I have a blast. I know I put a lot of time into it, probably more than I should, but it all goes back to that lifelong passion for toys and just really having been gripped at an early age by all of this fantastic stuff. I love these little pieces of plastic, and I really can't imagine my life without them.
That's awesome, and that's a fantastic story. I love, because doing this sort of thing, I mean, you said part-time, but really it's like a second full-time job, because it's always, for me, there's always some little part of me that's thinking about, okay, what's the next episode, or how can I incorporate something from this into what I'm doing? Like, my brain's much more engaged in this, which is technically a hobby, than it is in my day job. But I appreciate you coming on the show. That's a fantastic history, and it's funny because I think we've got this will be an interesting generational conversation, because I started with Star Wars when Star Wars started. My Christmas, you mentioned your Christmas with the T-Rex under the tree. My Christmas was the original Millennium Falcon under the tree.
Nice.
So but when Kenner relaunched Star Wars in '95 is when I became sort of re-immersed into Star Wars toys. When I was a kid, I had all the Kenner stuff. That was until G.I. Joe came along. That was my big line. But then, same way as you, in the '90s, it recaptured me again, and I was just trying to collect everything that I could. Because once they got past the big beefy superhero figures that they launched with, which I still love, don't get me wrong, that's a landmark in the Star Wars toy franchise, and I'll always love it. But once they got past those, they really started putting out some incredible stuff, even if it was just really nice repaints of the original vehicles. So. Do you have a favorite sort of corner of Star Wars toydom, a favorite line, or a particular aspect of Star Wars that you tend to gravitate towards more than others?
In the past, I would have said 3 3/4 inch was always like the focus of my toy collecting, and really it still is. But I think that's only because I have the longest history with it, and it's the mainstay of the entire line. And I have a bigger Star Wars collection than I do anything else. I mean, it's just the thing I've been collecting the longest. It's the thing that I have invested the most time and money and effort into. And 3 3/4 inch has always been the bulk of what I've been doing. But that being said, I really am into 6 inch as well. I have every Black Series figure. I think that it is still pretty ripe for growth as far as, new character possibilities, new things they can do with it. They've been kind of playing it a little bit safe, I would say, but I'm also really into things like the SH Figure Arts figures. I really do appreciate the 6 inch. I think as I get older, I appreciate larger figures. I still love 3 3/4 inch, obviously, or I wouldn't have backed the barge or anything like that. But I think as time has gone on, I've also branched out a little bit beyond that, and that's partly due to Hasbro offering the 6 inch line. And I do have a few things like the Hot Toys, not a ton of them, but I do have a few of those. But yeah, I mean, if I had to pick one thing that I could keep, or one thing that I had to only focus on the rest of my life, it would have to be 3 3/4, because again, that's the bulk of my collection. And that, to me, that's like really what Star Wars has always been about, is those 3 3/4 inch figures and vehicles and play sets. So yeah, if I had to pick one thing, it'd be 3 3/4 inch.
Yeah, I'm on board with that. That's the heart and soul of my collection. I've got a few things here and there. You mentioned the Hot Toys, and I've gone outside of 3 3/4 inch a little bit. I got when Sideshow had the license to make 12-inch figures, I got several of those, and the Black Series. It's a funny thing, because my friends and I, who've been collecting the 3 3/4 inch stuff for for decades now. When they initially switched to the Black Series, I was like, you traitors, I can't believe you're leaving our scale. But I've got a shell. I haven't gone all in, but they've put out some stuff I just can't resist. And now that they're the face printing technology that they're using, they're putting out these incredible figures. But fortunately, from what I understand, Hasbro's going to be bringing that to the vintage collection as well. So it's but yeah, it's all Star Wars toys. It's all great, and of course, the greatest of all of them at this point has to be Jabba's sail barge, which is pronounced how?
Jabba's sail barge, I believe it's pronounced the Khetanna.
That's what I've been saying, and every time I say it, though, I think of the sword, and is that a reference to the sword, or is everybody pronouncing this wrong? Is it Khetanna? Which I've that's the thing with Star Wars pronunciations, is very often we're reading them, because in the movies they don't refer to aliens by their species name. They don't refer to vehicles by their proper names. So more often than not, we've read these names. So you may have spent, I don't know if you ever dipped into the expanded universe, or if you're reading the current books now, which I haven't been able to keep up with. But, that's where we get these names and stuff that we often just read. So it's funny when you run into somebody who has actual practical knowledge of how something is pronounced, and it changes your whole Star Wars experience. So what happened with this is Hasbro, for whatever reason, decided that they really wanted to create and sell being the important part here, a 3 3/4 inch scale playset / vehicle of Jabba's sail barge from Return of the Jedi. Now, for me, I can't say, there's nothing from Star Wars, especially the original trilogy, that I would say I don't want that. But I can't say the sail barge was anything that I'd ever really thought about, like, oh, I have to have that as a playset. Like Jabba's Palace or a Star Destroyer or the Death Star probably would have come first, even though the sail barge is such a cool and dynamic thing in the movies. Was this one that you had thought of previously as sort of a grail of the collection, or was it something you were a little surprised they were making?
Honestly, I was pretty surprised that they actually did it, because I know for a long time, especially if you go back a decade when they were doing those Q&As that Hasbro was really awesomely doing for a while with a bunch of websites, people would ask about that, are you going to do the sail barge? And they said, well, there's not enough support behind a product like that. It's a little too niche. It's a little too not something that's really in the current entertainment. So I know a lot of people were asking for it, though. There was rallying behind it from, different websites like Bantha Skull. They wanted to see the barge come to fruition. So when they finally announced it, I was blown away. I really did not anticipate that was going to be a thing. But I was very happy that it was, because obviously, it, like you said, it is original trilogy. And for me, that's where like all of my the passion that I have for Star Wars, like the brunt of it is in the original trilogy. So I was super stoked when they announced the sail barge.
Yeah, it was immediately a must-have, because for the last few years, the 3 3/4 inch, or as it's generally referred to now, vintage collection style, has been fairly neglected. We get a lot of repacks or a lot of nothing. So just to have something new for that was very, very exciting for me. But what excited me more was just the concept of HasLab.
Yeah, that was interesting, because they did announce that at the same time. There's this new HasLab initiative where they are going to do these, far outside the box Star Wars or even Marvel, anything really that falls under the Hasbro banner, possibilities, as long as there's enough support to make them happen. People could get together and make things like the barge a reality. So, yeah, that is truly an exciting possibility. Just imagining the crazy things they could possibly do that just wouldn't work at retail. And I know a lot of people are asking for things like a Death Star and maybe a Cantina play set. Things like that, to me, are really exciting possibilities.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and what HasLab is, for the listeners, it's basically like Kickstarter, except you don't have to worry that you're never going to get the product you backed. because it's coming from Hasbro. If the thing meets its goal, which obviously it did, because you and I both have sail barges sitting somewhere in our homes right now, and we'll discuss that space issue in just a minute here. But it's Hasbro. If it hits the goal, if it hits the thing that they set, they're going to make it. There's a lot more certainty. I felt a whole lot better about throwing my money at them than I would have about any Kickstarter or anything like that. So I was absolutely in. You were absolutely in. And then began the waiting process. Now, before it was confirmed that they were going to make this thing, I didn't honestly feel like it was going to go through. How were you feeling at the beginning?
At the very beginning, I was optimistic. I thought, okay, so this is kind of like, that one thing that if we make happen could possibly open the door to greater things happening down the road.
Yeah.
If we don't support it and the opportunity passes us by, then I think that that's going to be a very clear signal to Hasbro that, long-term Star Wars collectors aren't really serious about putting their money where their mouth is, so to speak. So I was optimistic. I was hopeful that it was going to happen. A lot of people were saying, I don't think it's going to pass. I don't think it's going to happen. And I said, well, you know what? Let's just kind of wait and see what happens. We've already backed our barges. Let's just be hopeful and let's put the word out there. The hashtag back the barge was, it was going on Twitter. We were using it on Instagram, and it kind of took on a little bit of a life of its own within Star Wars collecting. As time went on, I started losing a little bit of that optimism as it got closer and to the deadline, and we still hadn't reached the amount of supporters that were needed. But then towards the end, when those numbers just spiked, I think everybody was really breathing a sigh of relief. I know I was really happy to see it doing so well, and I wasn't really surprised that it was backed, but I feel more relieved than anything else that it was backed because as we saw at Toy Fair this year, they're doing some really great collector-oriented items that are coming later in the year. And I have to ask myself if the barge hadn't passed, whether we would be seeing those things. And I'm inclined to think probably not.
Yeah, it's interesting because looking ahead, we have a whole year of sort of Return of the Jedi sail barge adjacent releases coming our way, from 3 packs of Jabba's guards to an all new tooled skiff, which is something that it's now that we've got the sail barge, it's a must have. But prior to that, is that really something Hasbro would have been interested in?
Right, exactly. I'm inclined to think not. I think since the barge did do so well and it was backed not only at the minimum amount of units they required, but, pretty significantly beyond that, I think that, kind of got Hasbro thinking, there are still 3 3/4-inch collectors out there who are, supporting this line, who have been in there, for the long haul, and let's try doing these other things that we haven't really done in a while. Because it goes back to what you said a little while ago, that 3 3/4-inch really hasn't had a whole lot that's been all that great in the last few years. They've gone to 5 POA, and personally, I think there's a place for 5 POA, but I don't think that it has to be like the flagship 3 3/4-inch line. I mean, it's okay if you want to sell a figure for $5. And, maybe with a single accessory, and, that's kind of its own, thing, the budget segment of 3 3/4-inch. But I don't think that, the super articulated 3 3/4-inch should have ever gone by the wayside the way that it did. So yeah, it's really intriguing to see what's on the horizon. And I'm just hopeful that, maybe they're kind of realizing now that, we still want to support, 3 3/4-inch super articulated, highly detailed, play sets, vehicles, whatever you guys want to give us. If, it's the stuff that we're looking for, and it's not, relegated to, a big fold-out BB-8 type playset.
Yeah, that's and look, I admire anytime Hasbro tries something that's a little different or a little new. I admire that. I'll give them credit for their current 5 point of articulation line, in that where there's a character that simply isn't available in the scale or the style I like. It looks they've gotten those to the point where the paint decos are solid, and where I can put those on the shelf in my collection they're fine. If it's a character that's not particularly dynamic, like the from Solo, the guards from Kessel, like those guys didn't do a whole lot. I don't need that figure. Like, I don't need a lot out of that figure. As long as it stands there and looks like the guy in the movie, I'm good. So, like, I do feel like there's a place for the 5 POA alongside the vintage collection style. But yeah, it's vintage had been neglected a bit, and I'm also glad that you brought up the idea of we need to support this so we can see what they're doing in the future, because that was absolutely part of my motivation as well. Like, I wanted a sail barge, but I also felt like if this is really my toy line, and it is, like you, the Star Wars wall is the biggest in my room, then I need to support this. I need to put my money where my mouth is and tell Hasbro, hey, I'm in, and whatever you guys do, I want to see the future of this HasLab thing.
Yeah, 100%. And to your point about them doing, much better on 3 3/4 inch 5 POA, I think that's totally true. If you look at Resistance, the figures are awesome.
Oh yeah, those are beautiful figures. I checked into the show for an episode, and it didn't grab me, and I kind of recognized, like, okay, this is something I'm going to have to go back to when I can watch a bunch of episodes at once, like probably with my son. I've got an 11-year-old son who is also a big Star Wars fan, and is actually, I am collecting the Jurassic Park line vicariously through him.
Nice.
But yeah, it's something we're going to have to sit down and get into together. But yeah, those figures are just gorgeous. If I had a place for them to go, I would have them all by now for sure. But at this point, they kind of don't fit anywhere in my collection. But yeah, and I love that they did them. It's just that my issue now is that we have a show that's ostensibly about starfighter pilots, and we have no starfighters to put them in. But it's time now, I think, to sit down and really talk about the Khetanna, which is the pronunciation we're going to stick with because it just sounds cool. What were your expectations going into this? Now, the process, I felt like Hasbro was very transparent about what they were doing with this ship, about what it was going to be. There were no issues about, well, I don't know if you have any experience with other toy companies. I was a Masters of the Universe Classics collector, so as much as I love that line, there was a lot of changes in things between what was announced and what was released. With this, I felt like Hasbro was very clear, this is what we're making, this is what's going to be involved with it, and at no point along the line did I ever feel like, oh, well, I was expecting this, but now we're getting this. My expectations were very firmly guided by Hasbro during this whole process. Did you feel like they were very good with communication throughout the I guess, production period?
I think they were. I know that I didn't receive any of those email updates, but I was able to see them through people that had forwarded them to me, or, certain websites were posting the updates. So I was able to see them all. I just never personally received them. But I think they did a great job at the very beginning saying, if this gets supported, this is what we're doing. It's going to be the most detailed Star Wars vehicle you've ever seen. It's going to look very film authentic. It's going to have some of the most amazing paintwork we've ever done, and we're also doing Yak Face and Jabba. You're going to get these amazing figures with the barge, and I think that they, throughout the process, did a good job providing updates, but also keeping people, uplifted to see that they were sticking true to their word of creating a product that was going to be solid, that was going to make a lot of people happy, and that it was going to be worth your $500. And the only thing that I think they could have maybe done a little bit better is that I think that we really could have used, maybe I'm jumping ahead here, but I think we could have used a how to assemble video. Like, I know that companies do that. I know that like Hot Toys will do that. Sideshow will do that with the Hot Toys figures, like how to build or how to pose your figure. And other companies do that too for like a set, how to assemble your new play set, things like that. So I really think this particular item, especially when you consider how unique and how special and how expensive it is, that they could have done that at the bare minimum. But that aside, in general, I think they've done a pretty good job, keeping people appraised of the situation, so to say. And just keeping the excitement going because, people have been seeing the development of this thing for a year. And, seeing the process come to fruition after all this time, I think has been a pretty rewarding thing.
I completely agree with you about the how-to video because I spent, I'd say at least a good half hour sweating and terrified trying to get the last corner of the sail onto the frame because it just wouldn't. And for the listeners, this has fabric sails, and I've got to say the engineering that went into this is astonishing. I've owned a couple of toys in my life, and I've never seen anything like this as far as just the planning. The planning that went into packing it was more intense than a lot of toys that I own, let alone the toy themselves. But so the fabric sails have to be put onto the masts and the support frames, and you have to sort of stretch them a little bit. And there was one corner. The sail has a sort of peg on it that slides in between the slot on the support frame. Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh! I was just my son was sitting here with me because he helped me put the whole thing together. And, of course, there were a couple of spots where I was like, I'm doing this part because if I break this, I get to be mad at me. But, I don't know that there would have been a better way to do it, but did you run into any spots where you were really like, I'm afraid I'm going to destroy this thing?
In the very same spot, putting together those sails, and they look spectacular when they're done, but they are a pain to get assembled. And the main problem that I had was, you have that main part, like the mast, or if you want to call it that supports the frame that goes above it. And then, you put on the fabric. Where I went wrong is I struggled a little bit with the instructions because I don't feel that they were exactly where they needed to be. But I was confused because the frame is it's really just one piece, but the way it's shown in the instructions, it's actually like 4 pieces. So I found that confusing. When I was trying to assemble that onto the mast, I accidentally put it on backwards, and it snapped in place. You would think that something like this would be a one-way assembly, but it didn't. It snapped in place the wrong way.
Yeah.
And I panicked a little bit. I struggled with getting those 2 pieces separated. I had to pull out the hairdryer and start heating it up, and it still wasn't coming off. My husband, I brought him in. Up to this point, I had done pretty well putting it together by myself, which I don't recommend. I think you do need a barge buddy in this case, you had. And I
love the fact that in the instructions it says you should have a barge buddy.
Totally. I brought him in, and we still couldn't figure it out. And finally, I'm like, okay, so it's just these 2 pieces that are stuck in this one space. So I found an itty bitty little flathead screwdriver. I just wedged it in, and right away, boom, it loosed. Okay. It loosened itself, and I was able to finish the assembly. And the stretching of the sails was a little bit nerve-wracking, I gotta say. My husband did help me with that. I said, okay, you hold it, and I'm going to stretch this as hard as I can over. And he's like, you're going to tear it. And I'm like, well, I don't know what else to do. It seems like this is the only way to assemble it. And, a little bit later, it was fully assembled. It was just a little bit of a nerve-wracking process.
The other point where I was really nervous was getting the panel that covers the cockpit off. That one seemed to be the most difficult one to get off, and I struggled a little bit, because it's curved, so it's hard to get a hold of it. It's not like the rest of the panels on the side where you have the little lip at the bottom and you just pull up. That one, it was a challenge.
It was. Somebody told me that if you put your hand through the inside of the cockpit and kind of push it, that it helps.
Oh, yeah.
But I actually didn't know about that when I was doing it. And yes, I totally agree. It was difficult for me to get off.
Well, and now it's with all of the parts, though, once you've done it a couple of times, you kind of get a feel for how to do it, and it's no big deal going forward. And that cockpit, my gosh, is just gorgeous.
Oh, yeah. There's never been any Star Wars vehicle with a cockpit that looks like this, and it's truly a work of art. When you pull that panel off and you're analyzing all the little details and all the little colors, and even the seats, they have a very nice metallic finish to them. Just the whole thing is a work of art.
Yeah, just all the instrumentation. Well, and that's, as toy collectors in this day and age, getting a lot of detailed paint is like the biggest thrill in the world. Because paint is something that has fallen by the wayside in a lot of ways in a lot of toy lines, and just seeing all of the paint apps on the instrumentation and the dials and the gauges and everything else in that cockpit and all over this vehicle is just mind-blowing.
Absolutely. And it doesn't end there, of course. Once you start getting through the entire interior, your mind is just blown as soon as you lay eyes on it.
I mean, I could write a full review of like each little section of this vehicle. I mean, obviously you've got up top where most of the action takes place. It is great. It's the deck. It's cool. I love the fact that they actually have the loudspeakers on the mast supports. I think that's fantastic. But then you have all of the and look, I don't follow along online with things as closely as a lot of people do. So for me, the trap door into the prison cell was a surprise. I did not know that was going to be part of the ship.
Yeah, I didn't know about that either. And, I actually didn't notice that there was a button there for it. So I noticed the door on top initially, and then I started like pressing on it, like, what's this? And then it opened up. I'm like, oh, so there's a door here, but you have to push on it. Right. And then a minute later I saw, oh, wait, what's this button do? And then I pressed it, and I was like, wow, the trap door opens when you push the button, and you can't even, like, it's so well integrated into the ship that you barely even see it.
Yeah, and what's funny is I saw it, and look, trapdoor into prison cell is one of the classic toy playset features, like, of all time. If your playset doesn't have a prison, then it's not even worth buying. But then if the trapdoor into the prison cell, like, that's it. That's the genius. That's the center of any playset. And I saw it, and I looked in the instructions, and the instructions say press the button under the railing. So I had the assistance of the instructions and couldn't find the button because it's so because I was looking for it on the other side first. I wasn't expecting it, and that's one thing that I really admire about this is that the engineers really designed this thing knowing that you were playing with it from one angle.
Yes.
All of the features, everything can be gotten to from that side. Visually, aesthetically, everything is designed from the opening side. So you can get to everything. It all works facing that way, and I really appreciate that.
Oh, yeah, 100%. And with a vehicle of this size, you really need it to be kind of a one-sided sort of place that where you can access everything from one side, because it's really hard to turn it to the other side, especially if you have it like on a shelf or something, it's really impossible to do that. So I'm really glad that they took the approach that they did in incorporating all of those features to be accessible from one side only, because I think it makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, not a lot of people are going to have a 4-foot lazy Susan in the middle of their room with this barge sitting on it. But that's not to say they neglected the other side, because it still has the opening. They've got, I guess you would say, ventilation panels and then actual functioning like window panels that figures can peek out of. Mm-hmm. Those are all along the side that opens, but the other side, the ventilation panels in the rear, still do open up and have functionality. They're not just sculpted in, and I appreciate that they did that.
Absolutely. I love the shutters. I love that they function. I love that some of them open and some don't. To me, that makes it even better. I don't know why, but just the fact that you can kind of play with it, and and you can customize it a little bit too. If you want to have them all the way open, you can do that. If you want to have them just a crack open, you can do that. If you want to have some open and some cracked open, when toys have the ability to be customized to your liking, I think that makes them all the more special. And just little touches like that really do it for me.
Well, and it's all about that play value of things that are just fun to manipulate and move around, and like, oh, my sail barge, I put this in. Granted, this is a whole lot of playground, so no two sail barges are ever going to look the same, but there is so much opportunity to sort of make this your own personal sail barge.
100%.
So aside from the trapdoor into the prison cell, do you have sort of a favorite feature or something you found that immediately just delighted you?
I think that the trap door I thought was a blast to discover. I would also say, and I'm turning my head to look because it's behind me, the fact that Jabba's dais slides back and forth, I didn't really expect that.
Yeah.
I thought that was a great thing for them to have done because it enables you to kind of, customize the figures you have around him. I do wish that it slid forward a little bit. I mean, that's not a huge deal. Obviously, the barge is awesome as is. It's just a little tiny nitpick of mine. But, yeah, in addition to the dice sliding back and forth and the trap door, I think the fact that the masts and the sails can be removed is great for playability. I'm never going to do that, most likely, but I can see how if you wanted to just take everything off and, maybe have like a little battle. I'm not sure how many kids are playing with the barge, honestly.
Right.
But like you said, it goes back to playability and just having those features there, in case you did want to use them.
Another spot, this just occurred to me since we're talking about the deck and I'm sitting here looking at it. Another spot where I got really nervous manipulating this thing is that deck cannon. It is designed, it's hinged to move up and down because obviously it has to be. You have to be able to point it at the deck to recreate one of the key scenes from the movie, but it comes out of the box at an upward angle. And again, the thing is designed so well that the moving parts aren't immediately recognizable as moving, and I felt certain that it should move up and down, but I really sat there sweating while I was getting because mine had a little bit, it had a little bit of paint stick, but then once I got it, it moves very freely. But that was another nervous part where I was like, all right, I'm going to get this thing loose. Do I need to go get the hair dryer? Because that's, as a toy collector, when you get something that's got a stuck joint, you know exactly how much wiggle you're willing to put into it before you say, okay, I've got to do something. I've got to do something more with this.
Too true.
And another thing that I loved that I didn't discover, my son actually found this one, is the smuggling panel.
Yeah, that's a lot of fun. You know what we need? We need some little vials of coaxium or something that we can sneak in there.
Oh, that would be fantastic. That would be absolutely great. Well, I've got the hover tank came with the little opening crate that has all the little doodads inside that. That wouldn't be a bad alternative for the time being. But I'm sure a third-party company or a 3D printer or something will create those sooner than later. Let's see. Just looking through here, I love the fact that there's a kitchen. Because I jumped on board this thing day one, just at sort of glancing at what they had thrown up there, and there's a big difference in looking at the printed design of something and actually having it in front of you, able to put your hands in it and put figures in it and whatnot. And I don't think I had really realized that the two little sinks and all the creatures hanging on the wall, I was like, of course Jabba has a kitchen.
Yeah, it's an awesome detail. And like you say, it makes perfect sense that he would. I mean, this Khetanna is, the way that it's detailed in the description is like it's a luxury yacht that Jabba has to showcase his wealth or something along those lines. So, I mean, yeah, it has to have a galley where, he has his chefs in there prepping up, the finest, meals on Tatooine. And I think they're called chubas, the little frog-like guys that hang in the back. Yeah, it's just the thought of it, without even seeing it, if you knew that the Khetanna had a kitchen, just the thought of it makes you wonder what it would actually look like. And the fact that Hasbro put it in here really makes this so much cooler.
Yeah, and I now specifically want, and I'm sure somewhere in the novels and in the extra material, we have met Jabba's chef, but now whatever that individual may look like, I need a figure of Jabba's chef. And you know what? I just noticed. I'm sitting here looking at the manual. The final page of the manual sort of highlights all the various features, and I just saw on here there's actually a breakaway railing that I hadn't even found or looked at yet.
Yeah.
There's a break in the railing to simulate where R2-D2 took off of the deck.
Yeah. That's another great touch that they incorporated on there. I actually have on my barge, and maybe we'll get into the figures in a little bit, but I actually have 3PO and R2 kind of headed in that direction towards where that break is, but they're not quite there yet, so the break is still in place.
Nice. Yeah, okay, yeah, so let's, now that we've talked about the barge itself, probably not enough, but some, because, really I could sit here for several more hours discussing this incredible thing. I'm very impressed. Before we move on to the figures, real quick, I just want to say I'm very impressed with the clear pegs that they have underneath as support to give it the illusion that it's hovering. Were there any other sort of big or little things that you wanted to call out before we move on to how we're going to staff this thing?
I just wanted to highlight how amazing the interior is. I know we touched on it a little bit with the cockpit and the prison and the galley, but I mean also the armory, and of course like Jabba's main his court, or if you want to call it that, is just superbly detailed. I've never seen a toy in this 3 3/4 inch, or probably any 3 3/4 inch line that looks like this. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. The woods look like woods. The metals look like metals. I mean, the inside of the prison cell looks kind of grimy. It looks like, like the Thorian corpse. He genuinely looks like he's been there for years on end. I even brought my husband in, and he's not usually one to notice these kinds of things. He doesn't really care for any of this stuff, to be honest. But he's supportive. He's glad that I like it, and but he can come into our home office where I have all my toy displays, and I can ask him, so how do you like the way I displayed my shelves, the way I rearranged the toys on my Jurassic Park shelf? And he'll be like, what? Wait, you rearranged them? I hadn't noticed. But as soon as he saw the inside of the barge, I mean, his jaw sort of dropped. He was like, wow, that is pretty incredible stuff. So to me, that just says how amazing of a job they actually did with detailing this fantastic vehicle.
Yeah, one other little thing I wanted to point out, because I'm not sure it's even mentioned in the directions, and it took some work, again, because there was a little sticky paint issue, I think, is Jabba's intercom does actually pull out of that table and go into his hand. That took a lot of work to get that thing loose as well. But it was a great touch, the fact that it actually works that way. I love it. I love that. And you know what? I guess as the sort of last thought about the barge, or my last thought about the barge, everything does, if not exactly what I expected to, more.
Yes.
Like there's nothing I looked at that I was like, oh, well, that stinks. That should have been better. Like there are a couple things maybe I would have changed a little bit, but for the most part, each little feature exceeded my expectations.
Absolutely. And I think that's where the barge really shines, is not only did they deliver on the promise that this was going to be one of the most incredible things you would ever add to your collection, but in my estimation, they actually went beyond that. I think it was, they had said it was at New York Toy Fair that this thing has like over 1,000 paint apps. And when you just think about that, that is absolutely insane. I mean, even in the 3 3/4 inch line, I can't think of anything that has 1,000 paint apps. I don't think anything has ever had anything close to 1,000 paint apps. But the fact that they just went beyond what we expected and really made the barge something special is something that's going to make it an everlasting piece in any collection.
And beyond that, and for the listeners, if you're listening to us talk about this thing so enthusiastically, and believe me, if anything, our enthusiasm is probably a bit muted even. This is still available. There are retailers that ordered plenty of this. You may end up paying a little bit more. I don't know how that's costing out, but you can still get your hands on one of these. And if you have even a bit of a thought that you would want one, I recommend you act now, because this is going to go down in toy history as one of the greatest toys of all time, if not the.
100%. Couldn't have said it better myself.
So, who are we putting in this thing? Obviously, we've got... Oh, you know what? Speaking of that, okay, what are you doing with Are you keeping your yak face?
On the card, yes, and I am keeping the figure, yes.
I just don't know, because they're releasing the regular vintage collection yak face. With Star Wars, I'm not much of a carded collector. I'm kind of thinking about selling this one and just having the vintage collection one. I haven't totally made up my mind, but I just, having this single carded yak face, I don't know that I need it.
Yeah, and there's no right or wrong way to go about it. If I know some people are doing that, and they're pulling back, roughly half of what they invested in the barge. So that's really a good way to help pay for it. I know some people also sold things off like the booklet, which they were selling those for around $40 not too long ago.
Oh wow, that's wild.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's highly tailored to whatever you like doing. I'm not a huge carded collector myself. I just feel like with this particular item, I want to keep it like 100% intact as I got it. So
Sure.
I do want to keep that figure because I think it's special. It is part of the set. I did have some issues with the condition of the overall card, but for the most part, it's great. It's displayable. And I mean, same with the Jabba. I know a couple of people that were selling Jabba because they already had Jabba, and I'm like, well, I don't know about that because this is the best Jabba that's ever looked in the 3 3/4 inch scale. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think there's not really any rules to the way we collect or how we collect, and whatever one person might do can be completely different to what the other person's going to do.
Well, and beyond that, we know that we have a new playset coming of Jabba's throne room. So personally, I need a second Jabba to go in that.
Absolutely. And if you've been collecting this line for, any amount of time, I mean, they do Jabba every now and then. We get updated Jabbas. And they've progressively, in my view, gotten better. This is the same exact Jabba that we had in I think it was 2015 when Toys R Us did that really big box set with the Rancor and, those other figures. They had some really nice figures in there. But this one has photoreal and it's got a much nicer paint scheme to it. So I think if that's kind of what you're going for, like the ultimate definitive Jabba, I think that you really need to have this one. And I do hope that if anything from this set that Hasbro does find a way to make that figure available later on, because there are going to be other avenues in which we will need another Jabba. Like if they do build out that playset, the adventure playset for Jabba's Palace, there's going to be a market for Jabba the Hutt, so I do hope that they find a way to get him out there again.
I don't doubt for a second we'll see this Jabba. Obviously the paint will probably be a little different. There might be some different tooling, but we'll see basically this same Jabba again in a future, multi-set. Maybe with, what I realized, staffing, and we can get into putting figures in this thing now. I don't have a modern Bib Fortuna.
Yeah. The last one they did was in 2006 during the Saga collection, which, 2006, that's already, I'm not great at math, but it's been over a decade.
Right. Over a decade is too long for any, I guess, primary supporting character. Is that how we describe Bib?
I call them secondary characters, and then for things like background Cantina aliens or things like Yakface, even I refer to them usually as tertiary figures, or kind of on the fringes. But that's just my personal way of defining them. But yes, I completely agree. Bib Fortuna did play a prominent supporting role in the whole Jabba's Palace thing. So I'm a little surprised we haven't gotten an updated one at this point.
Yeah, we need him, and that'd be a fine start to a set. But so I've got tons of, I guess you'd call them Jedi Tatooine figures, the characters that appeared in some capacity in the opening scenes of Return of the Jedi, whether they were on the sail barge, whether they were in Jabba's palace. And I love that they all share an aesthetic. They're immediately recognizable. My son actually went and collected them all from the shelves to bring over to the barge because I wanted him to put those in there however he wanted. And even though he's not as immersed in the mythology as I can't say I am, because as I get older, I start to forget the name of the guy that was standing furthest to the right in the wide shot of the, I don't remember that stuff like I used to. But, he was easily able to pull all the characters that were appropriate from the shelf and bring them over. And it is so awesome seeing all of those guards, seeing Klaatu, Barada, Nikto, which obviously are the 3 easiest to remember. But just seeing all of those characters on the deck of this thing and in the guts of this thing, it's amazing. And the fact that they don't fill it up is even more amazing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think when you look at the barge, it's one thing to admire how amazing it looks without any figures in it. But once you get those figures in there, I think that's when it really comes to life.
Yeah.
And it's highly customizable. You can do whatever you want with it in terms of, moving your aliens around, where you have Bib Fortuna standing, where you have, if you use C-3PO, wherever you have him. Is he going to be on the upper deck? Is he going to be on the inside? You really can do whatever you want. If you want to go full on and recreate scenes from the film, then, that's an option to you. But, it's like you said earlier, no two barges are going to be exactly the same. And I love that. I love that everybody can do whatever they want with their barges.
And you can have guys coming up through all of the ladders, go up to opening doors. So there's just so much interactivity with this thing. It's not a static playset. It's not something where, okay, well, I set this guy here and this guy here, and I guess that's what we do. There's so many different options to have the figures actually interact with the elements of this thing.
Oh yeah, completely. And that's another great thing about it is that, in the film, we did see people coming out of those hatches and just kind of appearing out of nowhere and giggling and, Princess Leia on the gun and, like you mentioned, 3PO and R2 going over the side if you pull out the little piece of railing. So, it isn't static. There are things you can do with it. And that's kind of what I've done with mine is for the top deck, I've tried to recreate Return of the Jedi as faithfully as I reasonably can. But for the inside, I've kind of gone for more of like, a Jabba, the Hutt, maybe not particular to Return of the Jedi, but like a time where, Jabba's just sailing around Tatooine in his barge.
A day in the life of Jabba.
Exactly. I have chefs in the kitchen. I have, in the armory, I have a few guys just kind of standing around chatting. I have the same thing going on in the prison where I put the two from Jabba's palace that were kind of protecting the Rancor or the Rancor keepers, Malakali, I think is his name, and Giron, because that just seems like where they should be. And then, I have Jabba just holding up his glass, looking all proud on his dais, and surrounded by all these other characters like Bosk and Erodian, not necessarily Greedo, but maybe it's Greedo.
Sure. They all dress the same for the most part.
Yeah, absolutely. They did, basically. And the only thing I don't have in there yet is Yak Face, and that's because I haven't been able to acquire, just a regular vintage collection Yak Face. I do have the Power of the Force 2 one, but it just doesn't look right in there.
Yeah.
And one thing that I do want to mention is that if you have Jabba's band members that have been released over, the last couple of decades, Hasbro did put out two of his drummers, and you had to buy each of the drummers to assemble the entire drum. Now, there's not really room, at least the way that I set mine up, to put that drum inside the barge. So what I did with those two drummers is actually put them to work in the kitchen, and they work perfectly in there.
Oh, interesting. I'll have to take a look around and see if those guys are still available. I never got the drum set for the band.
Yeah, I'll send you a photo afterward.
Excellent. Yeah, I'd love to see it. Well, I think we've covered Jabba's barge about as much as a verbal conversation can cover Jabba's barge. Are there any final thoughts you've got about this thing before we wrap up?
Just to say that if you did back the barge, you've been immensely rewarded by a fantastic product that I think is going to stand the test of time as being one of the greatest items that has ever been released by any toy manufacturer. If you didn't and you're still intrigued by the barge, I think that, you're probably going to want to jump on it now. I don't think that waiting, a year or 2 years is going to bring that price down. If anything, I see that price continuing to appreciate as the years go on. I think that it is probably the greatest thing Hasbro has done in the modern Star Wars toy line. And I would probably go as far as to say it might very well be the greatest Star Wars item that has been done in either the Kenner or Hasbro Star Wars toy line. It's certainly become the centerpiece of my collection, especially my Star Wars collection. And I just can't see my collection without it now that it's here. It's going to be very special for the rest of my life, I assume. And I'm really excited to have it. And if you have that opportunity to buy it, especially how it's going to become available seemingly to international customers pretty soon here, definitely jump on it. You're not, even though you might have to pay a little bit more for it, you're going to have to pay freight. You know what? It's a once-in-a-lifetime piece, and I think any longtime collector owes it to themselves to add it to their collection.
I agree with that 100%. Now is the time to jump on this thing if you missed out on backing it in the first place. I really think we may never see anything like this again. And it's, if I had not gotten it, I would be kicking myself daily right now, for sure.
Oh, yes.
All right. Well, Victoria, thank you so much for coming on the show. Before you go, tell us, where can we find you online and what are you up to?
Well, Dave, thanks a bunch for having me on the show. It's been fun chatting about the barge. I never get tired of talking about our favorite toys. Now, I can be found on YouTube. That's where I do the bulk of my work. It is through doing toy reviews, primarily for Star Wars and the Jurassic World toy line. We also do the odds and ends here, like Marvel Legends or DC figures, things like that. I'm also available through the Cantina Chatter podcast, which is available anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can download it or you can stream it on YouTube. I also have the Discoveryland podcast. That's a Disney history podcast. It's also available everywhere. And I can be found on social media. I do the bulk of my social media work on Instagram, where I'm constantly posting toy photography using my dinosaurs and my Star Wars toys in outdoor settings generally. And just creating fun photos. A lot of people are doing that, and it's a blast to get into. I'm Victoria's Cantina on Instagram. On Twitter, I'm at Vic's Cantina. And on Facebook, you can just search Victoria's Cantina, and I will show up.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about this incredible toy. And I look forward to talking to you again sooner than later.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Dave. It's been a blast.
So I strongly recommend you check out Victoria's Cantina on YouTube and also on Instagram. I've actually been following now since we first got the connection from our pal Adam Paulus. And what I'm really enjoying is all the Jurassic Park photography. She puts up some really cool pictures of the current Jurassic Park toys, like out in the wild and stuff. But these are... they're not like, I put up pictures of toys, but they have like maybe an Extreme Sets background or whatever, just because I don't have the motivation to take really nice toy pictures. Probably don't have the skill either. But if you follow Victoria's Cantina on Instagram, you get some really cool stuff with all the Jurassic Park, like dinosaurs, lots of dinosaurs out in the wild, like awesome photography. I've really been enjoying that, which is funny because like, as I mentioned, my son and I are sort of collecting that Jurassic Park line together, but to see something really cool and artistic being done with all those toys is awesome. And I know, Jurassic Park is, it's funny, there's a whole episode to be done about the generation of me and then the generation of like Victoria and like Ryan Cadaver, that 10 years younger, who The Lion King and Jurassic Park are like two of their sacred touchstones. Whereas for me, they're awesome movies, but they just didn't hit me at that same age that they hit those guys. That's an interesting podcast that I'm going to look into figuring out how to do like a generational thing. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. It was a lot of fun talking to Victoria. I'm hoping to work with her again at some point in the future on more Star Wars stuff. And just stay tuned. Always cool stuff coming. I love you guys.
Thank you for listening to the Needless Things podcast. You're the best. You can find the show on iTunes, Stitcher, Downcast, or in the ears of a Trader Vic's employee. Love you. Mean it. Uh-huh.